Wow, Rave sure is more violent than Fairy Tail. I mean, I guess. But I do think using anime footage while trying to talk about Mashima's art is disingenuous. And yeah, where Fairy Tail annoyed me at times with how it killed off so many characters, but not really, Rave definitely did that even if it also kept more characters dead in general. I'm still mixed on Sieg changing the future and keep going back and forth on it, since it's just a huge can of worms in regards to causality. As for something I don't think that I was wrong to be annoyed about, yeah, Sieg being brought up randomly in the Drew fight is obnoxious, but this also ties to a common thing in Mashima's writing. Because if you think nitpicky assholes like this fuck ripping apart his works is purely a Western thing, then you're mad. The Q&A corner in Fairy Tail very much addresses a bunch of the questions poking and prodding about the consistency of the world. Sometimes they're legit mistakes, sometimes the answers are dumb and Lucy and Mira poke fun at it, sometimes it's more or less fine. But, if either due to reader questions or editor concerns, if these constant questions end up in Mashima's head as he writes, then that could very well be a factor leading to moments where things are explained as if to address those concerns before they're sent. Given that Rave was fairly popular and that Sieg was an elemental mage, the element system being introduced and stating that every character has an element that they are intrinsically tied to would understandably raise questions about the element master who has recurred in the story by this point. Especially if he was a popular or liked character with the audience at the time, while clunky, Mashima stepping aside to explain what really amounts to trivia at the end of the day makes sense in regards to the kind of questions he generally receives from fans in Fairy Tail. Similar to the fake character deaths I brought up last time, it's very much a product of the medium, like it or not. So, it's kinda funny, some of the asides I make throughout. I can't help but to call Rave and Fairy Tail generic fantasy again and again. Like being derivative is a bad thing, and not something just intrinsic to media as a whole. And this is extra funny because I structured the video going into the good, the bad, and yeah, I didn't even do it on purpose when I first planned it out, even if I did lean into it after noticing it. I'm just derivative of myself. I'm the monster at the end of this book. And thinking back, it's honestly not really that accurate. By nature, even if it's in reference to Western fantasy, as a Japanese work, it's inevitably going to feel different. Even if the dragons look like this, wizards generally don't look like this, or this, or this. And combined with the guild-based structure in the world, that inevitably makes it very different. As for Rave, its collectathon chosen hero story definitely has some common fantasy connotations, but the setting is an anachronistic mishmash. Even when I deride the music reference thing as unoriginal, none of the examples I showed use the same pool of references as Rave. Guilty Gear and JoJo Stick More to Rock, Bastard Heavy Metal, and Violinist of Hamelin, which I'd be surprised if anyone recognized based on that fucking cover I chose, general orchestral instruments. Rave, while overall being fantasy, also has a mishmash of contemporary tech, sci-fi, psychic powers, mechs. Even if mishmashes of things themselves have happened before, Dragon Ball for instance, their cores still very much differ, since Dragon Ball has a general martial arts feel compared to Rave's more hip-hop thing. So, there's this joke I make about Musica and Grey looking alike. Is the basis untrue? No, they have clear similarities, being designed by the same person and all. However, what I don't like is that the basis of the joke is me doing something I should never do, and that's mistake one for the other. Mean-spirited ignorance just feeds into the kind of dismissive attitudes I hate. Ellie and Lucy aren't anything alike aside from being the most important female characters, like, what? Lucy and Acnologia have similarities, but they are overstated. Lucia's desire to remake the world is more akin to Zeref than Acnologia, something I don't bring up because it would muddy the comparison. Never mind that while I note how the two have dark versions of the same powers as the protagonists, what I don't talk about is how they thematically differ, because I didn't understand it. I'll go into Rave more in a bit, but fate is a major theme. Lucia adhering to his believed fate without question, where Acnologia is a man consumed by his hatred thanks to his loss. Where Zeref tried to remake the world to subvert the loss he'd experienced, and Natsu fought to protect his comrades to avoid loss, yet having to accept it regardless, Acnologia directed the feelings of his grief at the dragons who took from him, to the point of even becoming exactly what he hated, a dragon who looked down on other humans, consuming and destroying senselessly. At the core here, the argument was that Lucia was better because he was built up from the whole story where Acnologia was built up less than Zeref. But Zeref isn't actually beaten in the traditional sense, where Acnologia's defeat is at the hands of Natsu and Lucy uniting with everything, something the climax with Zeref was very much missing. Even if accounting for the differing build-up, a character as deliberately hollow as Acnologia is one I'd argue is ideal for being the final antagonist of Fairy Tail. A few blanket similarities will never overwrite the differences when they are so meaningful. Oh yeah, and on the note of Acnologia, Igneel just wanted Natsu to find E&D so that he could better understand and reconcile his nature, not destroy it. Silver was the one who wanted E&D defeated, likely only knowing of them as the strongest demon and or their most powerful tome. And the real baffling point is trying to make the argument that Rave has no thematic cohesion or through line, which is funny in retrospect because it very much does, and in my lack of reading ability, I couldn't find it if I had tried. The inevitable blood conflict of the two Gales calls attention to the idea of fate, something Shiba and Sieg discuss from very early on and serves as the thematic core of the conflict throughout the series. Lucia, descended from the one who created the current world, suffered for reasons outside of his control and attributed it to fate, something that then motivated his course of action as he followed through on this fate and his believed purpose to destroy the world and create a new one without the horrible fate that led to his suffering. However, it is exactly because he chose to follow this fate that he ended up in conflict with Haru. Haru, a peace-seeking idealist, never stopped trying to reach out to Lucia. Him using Sacrifar and becoming a man of violence rather than words was a thematic failure and underscored his defeat. Where in the final conflict, even after his victory he still tried to reason with Lucia and stop him from going down his doomed road. Haru states that even in his new world he'll have to forge his own path rather than follow the purpose he believes he'd been given. But that is something Haru had been doing the whole time, and had Lucia done that from the start, overcoming his circumstances rather than falling to them, then this fated conflict might have been avoided. It's so obvious that it's literally stated outright from beginning to end, and if that isn't a thematic through line, then I don't know what is. Making it all the more amusing that I couldn't see something so clear. Alright, now for the part where Haru cries about Musica's death. While I'm still not sure what the takeaway is regarding Sacrifice and Rave, the mocking tone here is kind of shitty? Like what? Haru should just accept death and violence as inevitable fact instead of trying to avoid it where possible? Something he holds on to in trying to save Shuda and even Lucia in the last arc. One can accept death, recognizing and respecting even the failure of those who'd passed away, without casually letting it happen in front of him. Anyway, let's talk about Sieg, a character who, while I still don't personally like, is also one I don't particularly dislike. He just exists. Some of my issues, like his Laration Sei's position, were mistranslations due to not reading the official release, which only became available during production of the Tirade even though I downloaded the fan scans of Rave to read them beforehand. And using fan translations was something that brought the whole Tirade down. Some of my issues were just me not getting his character and downplaying things that are very much there. Like the way I literally skip hundreds of chapters of Ellie and Sieg changing their feelings towards one another, Sieg becoming an unofficial member of the group and someone that Ellie would reasonably feel just trot over for his sacrifice, as though Ellie should just harbor a grudge for the rest of her life against a person legitimately trying to do better for past mistakes. And I do mean mistakes. For a character I argue has to look cool and never be maligned, Haru sure does kick his ass while only at a fraction of his potential, and this failure is exactly where his growth begins, something very much tied to his fight against the Magician Village and Haja. Though they manage time, in their isolation they have become disconnected from the world at large and stuck in their ways, trapped in time. Sieg, however, had gone to the outside world and begun to change. In fighting the town, he functionally fights his past self, those believing the same thing he did at the start of the story, their alignment to Demon Card evoking his own at his introduction. They believed they knew best, that they could judge what was best for the time stream as a whole, even as they decided that the rest of humanity isn't worth protecting. Sieg's final blow against Haja directly calls attention to this as non-magic items can't be so easily blocked by magic, something he became very much aware of through his defeat at Haru's hands earlier, the growth he'd had since leaving the village not just marking his change as a character, but feeding into the mechanics of the fight. Like, God forbid a character do something cool. Luffy is cool, Urza is cool, Shonen is cool, Jesus fuck! Wow, why are you so mad about every little thing? Gonna cry? Gonna cry home to mommy? Like, how is Sieg the most sung here in the manga when Haru is right there? How in the hell is Jalal having more of a sway over the plot a bad thing when he's an antagonist, and Fairy Tail as a guild in general is more reactive by nature? How the fuck did Urza lose her personality because of Jalal? If she changes, it's because of Natsu, and much of her personality traits still remain after Tower of Heaven. If anything, Jalal was restricting her change since she was trying to get close to him based on old feelings even though he was very much a different person. I then try to make the same claim about Ultir and Merity, as if Ultir doesn't have more going on after she stops being a villain. Like, by Jalal's side, she's just kinda there, and on Tenro she's evil, but after that she can smile and she can show guilt and be involved in comedy. And never mind Merity, who is deliberately stoic and lacking in personality on Tenro before becoming a bubbly, more normal girl after. And this isn't even because of Jalal, it's because of Grey and Juvia. Hello! There's very much a narrative being pushed here. One thing I agreed with then, and agree with now, is that character development isn't always ideal for a story. I did a whole video on how change isn't all that stories can or should be about. But Urza's positive change is not bad. As mentioned before, it's not about taking down all her shields, it's about being able to take them down at all. Something she struggled with even regarding her guildmates, the people she could call family. Had she not changed, then she'd be more of a Nightwalker, one beholden to rules and systems rather than the bonds those systems are meant to help, guide, and protect. The core point isn't wrong, but it's completely misapplied as I look at several characters who will all grow and change for the better, both for the livelihood of the characters and the story as a whole. And I try to argue that it's somehow a bad thing. I look at Urza, a character who at the time I believed to be Mashima's most well-written character, the one I would currently say is my second favorite after Lucy, and I only see red-haired fighting boob girl. Yes, let's reduce a character to her sexuality because fuck everything. Yes, her design changes, Mashima's whole art style has changed. How would Urza beating up Grey a little bit for his nudity change the deep effect Ur's life and death had on him, the latter of which he struggles with throughout the entirety of the manga? Like, yeah, Natsu being afraid of her and not Gildarts or Laxus is kind of weird. Them bathing together doesn't necessarily mean she's put down her emotional armor, but how is any of this Sieg or Jalal's fault? I'm shocked I didn't get an award for this video. This leap in logic is worth an Olympic gold, at least. Like, okay, how is Rave worse in structure and power escalation when Haru was obviously not in King's Ballpark and the Sinclair hadn't even been introduced yet? The person who said Dalton the Chrysalis was the strongest soldier of the Empire was not actually a soldier or anything, and his power clearly comes from being able to multiply. So one Dalton not being very much of a threat isn't a good indicator of his potential power. His true capabilities are treated as a rightful threat, but he's stopped by Shuda having the perfect counter. As mentioned before, Haru doesn't outright beat Lucia since using Sacrifar is a failure on his part since he almost killed Plu because of what it does to him, and once he loses it, he gets wrecked. Never mind that as a foil to Haru, both of them grow throughout the series. Like, how do I complain about the gauntlet of encounters and fights they have to go through when almost all of the Sinclair pieces are assembled? Demon Card is getting on their asses and pulling out all the stops, so it only makes sense. Was I annoyed with that at the time? Yes, but as mentioned last time, being annoyed at Mashima's work in general meant anything would have annoyed me. Is the Empire Gate being destroyed dumb? No, charging forward regardless of opposition is a very shonen thing. And Ruby is downplayed a lot in the video, because he's not a major character, even though he does grow and change. To bring up the all too fitting idea of detours in Hunter x Hunter, they gained more from their detour in picking up Ruby than just a way to get through the gate they happen to never need. And I bring up Hunter x Hunter for another reason, because I complained about the Tower of Din arc feeling like an ending. You know, like Hunter x Hunter chapter 339 feeling like an ending even though the story obviously has more to go. Something Togashi deliberately did when he wanted to evoke the feeling of series ending but going on anyway. Is it wrong for Mashima to have done so? No, and I think the best moments in Rave are after the Tower of Din. When am I going to stop complaining about things that make something different and aren't even bad, as if they are? Oh wait, this is the last part of the main series. So, which do I like better? Fairy Tail. Well, Fairy Tail has some lows. The more I think on it, the more I continue to appreciate it. That's not untrue of Rave, but Fairy Tail I think is the stronger of the two. Does that negate the people who happen to enjoy Rave more? No. I encourage people to challenge their reasoning, but at the end of the day, feelings are complex and not always easy to explain. There's a purity to Rave, a style to Rave, that one can say Fairy Tail does not have. Even the fact that it's older gives it a nostalgia all its own, like the fact that it was aired on TV in a way that Fairy Tail wasn't.
3, 2, 1, time for revolution!
My first experience with Rave, and as a result, Mashima's work as a whole, was a scattered couple of episodes. One regarding Haru's encounter with Sieg, the other being from the Tower of Din and the reveal that King was also called Gale. While my experience was more fleeting, I could easily imagine someone really liking it as a kid and still having some kind of love for it even if they might also see some issues in it. Yet throughout this video I continue to only argue from my perspective as if it's the only one. But wait, Craftsdwarf, didn't you already go back and look over the mistakes of the Tirade and the Lies video? And also didn't you skip the good points section? Accountability is good, and I'm glad I at least had some sense to make the Lies video. A few things I covered in this new series I very briefly admitted to messing up on in Lies, but given that it was done so close to the Tirade, many of my feelings and opinions still lingered. Many of the corrections are terribly backhanded and annoying in how shallow they are. Like the biggest mistake admitted was Demon King Dregneel and Adolis. But even though I admit my fuck up, I also randomly talk about how, isn't it weird that Natsu props up the evil king as a victim to the people that he rules over? Like, why? The people generally believed the king, though evil behind the scenes, wasn't a bad person. So Natsu targeting him in public and bringing his son into things was a very easy way to get negative attention. While trying to admit that I'm wrong, I continue to jab away at Fairy Tail because I can't give it any credit whatsoever. Like, oh, even though I'm wrong in this instance, I'm not emotionally wrong. No, I don't think Natsu is as well written as Luffy, but I claim Natsu has no nuance to his intelligence. Like he's just a comic oaf, when he does have legit moments of cleverness that make logical sense, making the narrative that he's just stupid unfitting. A bunch of mistakes are already covered in some fashion, but to quickly cover some things I only said in lies. Etherion was never deployed in Alvarez, and the attack was so fast I am honestly not sure what defense the Magical Council was supposed to muster. They were already in shambles after Tartaros, several key members had recently left in the form of Levi, Gajiel, Panther Lily, and Doranbolt, and the 4 gods coming to assist is honestly a huge portion of their remaining power right there. An Etheria attack would have been risky without communication with Fairy Tail since they might have gotten caught up in the crossfire, especially given Natsu's tendency to just charge right in. I also bitch a lot about the abstract space we see representing Natsu, which we see in another form later in Alvarez. And the cryptic dialogue I knew primarily from the fan translation. There's no threatening going on here in the official release. If anything, Igneel is concerned about getting involved with humans as a whole, which he believed Grandini to be threatening, even though Grandini admitted that it's not really possible for them to interact with humans. You know, 'cause they're dead. I'll admit that even the official translation could have been better in regards to who's being implied and when, but it was a translation done as the series was being released, so mistakes that don't have the full context of the series in mind are bound to happen. And maybe it was Mashima not fully knowing which direction to take the story reveals by this point. I have no idea. Also, while it might have been the dragons inside them that kept them in the barrier, it also could have been the fact that they're from centuries past, so multiple explanations are available. The best thing I have to say in the entirety of the tirade was a short aside in Lies, where I state that if you, a YouTuber, have a big project in mind, start planning it. The tirade was an undoubtable success, many of the videos still being the top viewed parts of my channel even now, 3 years after I started it. They've been a massive hit, and potentially left an irreparable mark on the discussion around Fairy Tail while also contributing to everything I hate about media discourse. While positive videos on the series exist, to my knowledge no one has directly challenged the tirade in its entirety until I started the series back in November, likely because the community largely agreed with the sentiment regardless of what I had to say. The backhanded jokes, the smug dismissiveness. Even if I were actually right more often than not, these videos would only convince someone who was already feeling doubts about Fairy Tail or hadn't actually read it. A handful of people I talked to never even read Fairy Tail but watched the videos anyway. Negative videos just do better. Because people who don't like the thing want reaffirmation, people who don't care for the thing get a funny video that justifies them not spending the time with the series, while people who do like the thing feel the need to engage with it and defend their personal feelings, where a positive video doesn't inspire that kind of defensiveness in people who don't like the thing. And I don't really care if you, the viewer, still hates Fairy Tail or not, as long as my videos aren't being weaponized against it, like or dislike whatever you want. In the afterword of Magicians, Mashima outright states that he was pretty embarrassed that he published something as dumb and ridiculous looking back on it during the publishing of Rave Master. He made a similar comment during the run of Fairy Tail, about how at that point in his life, Rave seemed embarrassing. And it wouldn't surprise me if he came to say similar comments about parts in Fairy Tail one day. While making this tirade, I legitimately believed I was improving, while arguing that Mashima had been at about the same level as he started. And not only do I think that's far from the truth, I see more of myself in Mashima than I ever did then. While I can't deny that the tirade was a very important step for me as a creator, and the scale of my channel, looking back, it's painfully bad. Its truth lies in the emotions, the snapshot of how I legitimately felt about Mashima's works at the time, one that hasn't aged well. I'm tired of long-winded negative critiques that hate to acknowledge the literary value or cultural context, because it's so easy to get tons of views doing shallow, emotional content that all too often misunderstands what's being torn down. There's no positivity to be found. Nothing is being elevated or helped. I've been tired of people being dismissive and not understanding the things I like well before I started YouTube or even got into anime proper. If you were there during the heyday of the big 3 fanbase wars, then you know what I'm talking about when most people's image of your favorite thing of all time is a fucking 4Kids dub. Even if I never targeted any Fairy Tail fans specifically, or even spoke much generally about them, I still very much contributed to an overall atmosphere of toxicity, hate, and elitism, and I'm not proud of it.
They said, "What are your thoughts on Fairy Tail?" And so the reason why they asked that, they explained that the reason why is because they see all of these anti-tubers and all these people call it fairy fail. and that people just call it trash and whatnot. But they said that Fairy Tale was one of the shows that they had a really sort of very specific connection to it. And so they asked me, "Do you have any thoughts on Fairy Tale?" Because I keep hearing people say that it's bad, it's trash, it's all this kind of stuff, but I really like it. So I was wondering if there's something that it's doing that I'm just not really like catching on to. Um, but then they sort of like have this incredibly sort of depressing interpolative apology where they say, maybe it's not saying anything, and if it's not saying anything, then I'm sorry, I'm, all that kind of stuff. That is really fucked up. That is really fucked. This is effectively the person who has internalized this sort of like elitist versus trash mentality that has essentially been parroted under the guise of irony, but now they've taken it seriously and be like, yeah, this show that I care about, maybe it is just bad. Maybe it is just trash. Maybe there is just nothing, and I don't have, and there's nothing valuable in this sort of thing.
To any Fairy Tale or Rave fans who've had to suffer through people arguing my awful points, I apologize. As someone who's had to and will continue to push against dumb points like One Piece has no character development, or Sasuke is a bad character, the idea that I might have influenced similar dumb points targeted at Fairy Tale doesn't sit well with me. Personal feelings should not preclude one's ability to discuss and understand something, and I would much rather help people reach that understanding. Do I still have problems with Fairy Tale? Sure, I think most people are going to have some things they don't care for about anything, even their favorites. I still don't find a bunch of the humor funny, a bunch of the antagonists don't stick out to me. Originality Says I might need to reread again, but I still wasn't a huge fan. Lucy is great, stop bullying her Mashima with the sexual assault. The Urza stuff was still better in retrospect, but no! Let her have her body. It's a nice body, but it should be hers. Stop. Jalal. You're kind of a simp, you know that? Give me back my fucking cake. You fucker. Jalal ate my cake. He took it from me. It was labeled. It had my name on it. Fuck you, Jalal. There, I said it. Whew, yeah, okay. But yeah, I like Fairy Tale, and I liked it. It first grabbed me emotionally when Lucy and Natsu helped a son understand the feelings of the father he hurt. Way back before originality twisted my feelings to the negative. But I kept coming back, and not always out of mean-spiritedness. Laxus's return on Tenra Island prompted me to pick up the manga for the second time after having dropped it a few months before, and now, even though I had nothing good to say about him in the tirade, he's my third favorite character in the series. Grey vs. Silver made me cry. When the tirade happened, I hadn't known about Mashima having lost his father at a young age. So coming back to the series well after the tirade knowing that, two of the moments that got me were Haru losing Gale and Natsu losing Igneel. Moments that hit me harder knowing that Mashima's circumstances led to him exploring those feelings in his work. I tried to argue that Rave and Fairy Tale were nothing. That these stories that connected to so many people for their genuine heart and soul were somehow empty because I didn't like them. And couldn't accept that. But now I can't think of many creators I relate to as much as Mashima, who's so open about his failings and feelings about his own work while just wanting people to enjoy what he makes. All while steadily improving in ways I only wished I could have during the tirade. Ending it thinking I'd grown, where now I look back and see a swamp of faithless, empty critique masking a bunch of pointless anger. Mashima knew more about storytelling than me then, and a handful of mistakes doesn't somehow make that not true. Hell, he knows more about storytelling than me now. Going back to writing, even if it's just another fanfic people will barely read, I continue to learn with every chapter how much I don't know. And that's with the luxury of not having a deadline, among the other brutalities of the manga industry's workplace. It doesn't matter how much you read about writing because you'll always learn more by actually making something and putting it out there. I may look down on the tirade, but for making it, and for going back to it, I can say I've learned a lot. And I still have more to learn. I don't want to dwell too much on what I'm doing next, because while working on this video I've already been saying more of what I want to. And thanks to this series, whenever I return to Fairy Tale or Mashima's works on this channel, I can do so without the burden that is the overly long, ignorant rant on Fairy Tale. Now that it's over, I'd like to thank my patrons. Brian Nesseth, Dojo32161, Flarbu, Kurosawa, Muhammad Akim, Thanks Nitrorad, Justice Man, Bayanort, Brorike, Offline But Not, Sam Bellmeyer, and Ten Goon. Thank you for watching.